We'll share the screen. And we're going to do a little bit of our Torah portion because Wednesday and Thursday are a holiday. Thursday is Yizkor. Shabbos is back to a regular Torah portion, Torah reading, in the regular flow of Torah readings. And this week is called Naso. And today's Torah discussion has almost nothing to do with the Torah portion. Just going to touch on something. It's really not about that. It's really more about Torah, which is more Shavuos. But let's read about the overview. It says, completing the head count of the children of Israel taken in the Sinai desert. This, just to give some a little bit of context, and I have to make sure I don't go over today because I have we have a bas mitzvah starting. In the chronological unfolding of the Torah, starting from creation and Abraham and Sarah and Jacob and the family, and the second book of the Torah going into Egypt. So from the second book of the Torah, you're coming into Egypt, and then that's just like for a verse or two, and then it's the whole Passover saga. From the beginning of the second book of the Torah, the calendar moves very slowly. Through the second book and the third book, we only have 5 books of the Torah, and the 5th book is a recap. So there's really only 4 books to get through the chronology, pretty much. Second and third book, it's really only maybe 2.5 years. There's about a year of what the plagues in Egypt. It's the Jews going out of Egypt, and then everything then is they come to Sinai 7 weeks later, which is Shavuos, and from there they're in the Sinai desert for almost a year, and that's primarily the entire third book of the Torah. The second half of the second book, and the entire third book of the Torah is all there. We're still there, but now it starts talking about the rest of the journey, and then we skip 38 years and go to the end. But because we know nothing about 38 years of it. But the fourth book of the Torah, which we started yesterday, it's called In the Desert. It's about the journey in the desert. When they started actually moving from the Sinai desert, which hasn't exactly happened yet, but they're working on it. So first they have a head count. The head count of the census. The head count of the children of Israel taken in the Sinai desert, a total. This is a completion, this week's Torah portion, because we started yesterday. Total of 8,580 Levite men between the ages of 30 and 50 are counted in a tally of those who will be doing the actual work of transporting the tabernacle. God communicates to Moses the laws of the Sota, the wayward wife suspected of unfaithfulness to her husband. Also given is the law of the Nazir, the Nazirite. Good morning. Good morning. For swears wine. Good morning. Tess lets his or her hair grow long, and it's forbidden to become contaminated through the contact with a dead body. Aaron and his descendants, the Kohanim, are instructed on how to bless the people of Israel. This is page 91. And it's actually 90, yes. And these are the 12 tribes of Israel. Each bring their offerings to the inauguration of the altar. Although the gifts are identical, each is brought on a different day and is individually described by the Torah, which is all wonderful. And like I say, it has nothing to do with what we're going to discuss today. It's just the Torah. It's the Torah portion, it's the Torah portion. But not, we're dealing more with the value, how the Torah, how Jewish wisdom sees the value of Torah. Now, before we get started, just to frame it, from the Torah itself, and the Torah lays out as part of its Torah program, it lays out some of the unfolding which led us to get to Torah. Because the Torah, if you're starting from the beginning of what we call the Torah, starts before there was a Torah. Torah is only given to us halfway through the second book of the Torah. Torah is given to us at Mount Sinai 7 weeks after we left Egypt by the Passover events. So what we got at Sinai starts well before and laying out Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah, the whole deal. the first book and a half of the Torah, roughly. So, but if that's the case, the Torah came about when we were hundreds of years after Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah are often called the first Jews. There are patriarch and matriarch. Their children, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and his wives. But Abraham and Sarah are the first ones. On the one hand, we say clearly they didn't have mitzvahs. There's no way for anyone thinks that Abraham and Sarah had a mezuzah on their door of their tent like we do, because that's a mitzvah in the Torah. They only came about hundreds of years later. But the Talmud is replete with references to the idea that the pre-Sinai generations had something approximating Torah. The wisdom, even if it wasn't concretized in mitzvahs, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit. So, but let's look at text 1, which is on 92. And they bring one example, as I say, that the Talmud has plenty of them in the Medrash. When Jacob, who again lived hundreds of years before we got the Torah, no one argues that. No, argues against that. When Jacob is described in the Torah, it says he was a man of integrity living in tents, a plural in tents. Okay. And what does the Medrash tell us? That tents means a tent of study. And what was that? 2 tents, the house of the study of Shem and the house of the study of Ever. That there were, Shem was an ancestor of Abraham's, and he was someone who, the Torah tells us, walked with God. This was someone who had spiritual insight pre-Abraham. He's where the Semite comes from, Shem. We're descendants of Shem. And it says Jacob studied from him. Jacob studied something, Torah. Doesn't call it Torah yet. Actually, not in anything they bring here, from Shem. And there was another person called Ever. Shem and Ever are 2 people we see as predating Abraham and having a connection to the monotheistic tradition. And they're teaching it. They're teaching monotheism. They don't bring it all the stuff here, but actually you'll find that they were teaching more also ideas that would later be concretized in Torah. To the extent, and we want to stick with Torah more now, but I don't want to make this the subject of today's conversation. The Talmud says that Abraham and Sarah fulfilled all of the mitzvahs that we have today, which is impossible. And the Talmud knows it's impossible. What they've done, some of the stuff came about after them. The idea is that they were sensitive to the spiritual energies that are articulated and expressed through our mitzvahs. So, for example, if you told me that Abraham and Sarah had a rock outside their tent, and it said, God is one. Our God is the oneness of the universe. I can believe that. They were monotheists. Did they have a mezuzah? Absolutely not. Did they have the idea that reflected? What's a mezuzah? A mezuzah announces to you as you walk into a room that you believe that whoever owns this room believes that everything, hopes and believes that everything in this room should be connected with the oneness of the world, which is godliness. That's what the mezuzah does. That's the point of a mezuzah. It's an announcement when you walk in that God is one. It's a Shema, is in that mezuzah, God, the announcement of oneness. So while they didn't have a mitzvah, they had no command of mezuzah, and a mitzvah means a command. So clearly they didn't have a mitzvah. And they didn't have a mezuzah as we have it. They were aligned with the ideas. And I just gave you a possibility. Maybe they wrote it on a rock. I don't know. But the ideas they were sensitive to. That's what the Talmud is telling us. That they didn't have concretized mitzvahs. The only mitzvah that they had from, as far as a mitzvah approaching the mitzvah of a Jew was they had the mitzvah of bris, of circumcision. That was commanded. So they didn't have mitzvahs, but they had sensitivity. Now, we're going to get back into this in a second. So we're going to take a little journey through one concept of Torah to try to get a little deeper understanding, the different perspectives on what Torah is to us. If you look at text 2, text 2 is a quote from what we call the 13 Principles of Faith. 13 Principles of Faith are theological ideas, axioms that Maimonides, great Torah scholar, distilled and said, here, if we have something that approaches a dogma or theology, this is what they are. Number one is we believe in God. And 13 principles of faith. They break down, one could say, into 3 categories: about God, about Torah, and about God's interaction with us as far as in response. I'm sorry?
Like,
not there yet.
oh, okay.
Oh, actually, you're right. I am there. I am there. Text 2. This is the apologize. The principle 9. It is because again, there's a group of there about Torah. Principle 8 was that we believe that Torah is of divine origin. Principle 9, and the way it's expressed in many prayer books, this isn't exactly Maimonides' language, is I believe with complete faith. Some prayer books have these statements of faith every morning after services. In Chabad, we don't have it, although we believe in them, but it's not part of the liturgy. I believe with complete faith that this Torah will not be exchanged, that no additional Torah will be given by the Creator, blessed is His name. We believe, Maimonides says that this is Torah, and this is it. There's not going to be another Sinai. And even if someone will come along later on and say, God revealed himself to me on the road to Damascus and said, I'm going to amend the Torah and there's going to be a New Testament. Or someone's going to say, God revealed himself to me in a cave and said, yes, that's true, but here's Appendix A. We don't believe in it. And so Torah, Maimonides says, this is Torah. Once, it doesn't get changed. We don't believe in divine edits. And Maimonides puts it into his book of laws and fundamentals of the Torah, text 3. It is clear and explicit in the Torah. Maimonides sees this within the Torah's writing, that it constitutes a commandment that stands forever and ever. It brooks no change, neither reduction nor addition. So from Maimonides' perspective, and Maimonides understands Torah, he says the Torah itself shouts that this will never be changed. This is a one-time gift from God. God's always engaged, but this Torah is never going to be changed. Now, Maimonides is great, but Maimonides is not beyond being challenged. So if we're going to look at text 4, a devout student of Maimonides, who lived in the 1400s, his name was Rabbi Yosef Albo. He wrote a book on Maimonides' 13 principles. It's called the Book of Principles. And he has deep respect for Maimonides. He argues a little bit, and he says it doesn't have to be 13. We could break it down to 3, like I said before. But he spends a lengthy book, trying to flesh out what Maimonides thought and where we stand on it. And text 4, he says, I'm not so sure why we have to believe the Torah can't be changed. He says, Maimonides' words here, oops, I just lost it. Maimonides' words here require careful consideration. From where did our teacher derive this principle? He says, I'm looking at the Torah. I'm not so sure I can see the Torah saying this. Although this principle is surely of great importance, and if Maimonides derived it from tradition, we accept it graciously. If that's what God said, that's what God said. I'm trying to figure it out where we see it. And I'm wondering, still, if it derives from Maimonides' own reason, then we have room to inquire. We don't have to accept that just as graciously. We can argue. After all, the Torah warns only not to add or detract from the mitzvahs on our own account. The Torah does say very clearly, don't add to the Torah, don't subtract from it. So that means you and I don't have the right to say, I believe in 612, that one, I mean, you can believe whatever you want, but the fact is we're not going to, as a Jewish community, we're not going to delete anything, and we're not going to come up with a 614th mitzvah. It's the 613 mitzvahs, there are rabbinic things, but we respect, and the Torah itself says, don't add and don't subtract from it.
Okay, but this contradicts a little bit with what you said a few minutes ago. Okay, the revelations on the road to Damascus specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we know that it wasn't given by God?
That one specifically, I got a bunch of reasons, but here we're saying is that that's exactly what Rabbi Yosef, I mean, he's not advocating for that one, but he's saying is, in principle, why can't you say that God edits? Right? God can do anything. He can edit his own Torah, right? Although you may say, why? How could an infinite being want to change his mind? We get into it, but Yosef Albo is coming from a place of deep faith. He's saying, I just don't get this. Why is this a principle of faith? If God wants to change, God will change. After all, what can possibly prevent God from adding or subtracting when his wisdom decrees? If God wants to change it, it's the same God. God gets us back to Sinai and says, by the way, seeing how you guys are dealing with it, I'm going to switch number 248 and make it a little bit more adaptable. That's what God wants to do. That's what God wants to do. Maimonides is saying that that's impossible. If you look at text, now to text 5, Maimonides himself lays out how the unfolding of humanity before the giving of the Torah. And he writes that when Adam was given 6 commandments for humanity. Believe in God, don't blaspheme God, don't steal, don't kill, don't murder, set up laws of justice, and don't commit sexual immorality. Adam and Eve had those. So we had 6 mitzvahs. Now, and it appears from the Torah's words that Adam was commanded concerning them, and the prohibition against eating flesh from a living animal was added for Noah. Now, Adam and Eve were vegetarian, or they at least did not have license to kill for food. It's possible they were able to eat from animals that naturally died. They didn't eat food. They eat meat. After Noah, God explicitly says you can eat meat. But God adds something else. You can't eat meat from a living animal. You can't just tear meat from a living animal. That's the 7th. There's 7, we call them Noahide laws for all humanity, 7 mitzvahs. Before we got our 613 mitzvahs, there were 7 mitzvahs for all humanity. Those 6 I mentioned, and the 7th is cruelty to animals, but it's not eating meat from a living animal. So God added. As time went on, God said, here's another one. And you know something? You weren't able to eat meat. That was for specific reasons with your nature. Now, after the flood, have a burger. That's Torah. And so it remained throughout the world until Abraham, that there were 7 mitzvahs. Abraham arose and was commanded in addition to these regarding circumcision. He also introduced the morning prayers, which is not necessarily a mitzvah per se, but okay. Isaac separated tithes, introduced an additional prayer before sunset. Jacob, after his wrestling with the angel, God gave the mitzvah of not eating the sciatic nerve of an animal, and introduced the evening prayers. So Rabbi Yosef Albo says, what do you mean God can't change the Torah? Look at the Torah. God's adding and subtracting. Say, you can't eat meat, but later generation, go right ahead. You right now, you can eat the sciatic nerve, but it's in Jacob's time, take that off the table. So
again, though,
yeah,
going back.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say, for instance, God had spoken to Rabbi Herson. Would that have been considered a legitimate addition?
No. So the thing is, the idea of people, great spiritual greats, communing with God and giving, and expressing God. That's never to add or to subtract from the Torah. It's about giving guidance to a generation. So if Rabbi Schneer, when Rabbi Schneerson said, let's make a campaign to help Israel and help people put on tefillin, that wasn't a 614th mitzvah. That was a campaign to do a mitzvah that we've had since Sinai.
Mhm.
And so, and no prophet in history, not Elijah the prophet, nobody ever added to the mitzvahs, and then allowed to subtract from it. Okay, but we're still left with Rabbi Yosef Albo's question. So how can Maimonides be so insistent that the Torah is not going to change when the Torah itself says that God's not going to change the Torah, when the Torah itself says that God changed things on the mitzvah's end? And let's look at text 6. Go back to Rabbi Yosef Albo. Here's his way of seeing it. He says this food that's most appropriate for a child is milk. And adults' proper food is bread, meat, and wine. With development, we need different things. So similarly, the divine commandments transform with the times. God saw what Adam and Eve needed. He sees the development of humanity, and then he starts to see it a little differently. He says, okay, for you, it's a different diet. Makes sense. Why does Maimonides take that off the table? Because meat was forbidden to Adam and forbidden to Noah and his descendants. And that's just an example. At any rate, this proves that although the divine laws are never, and just as a translation, I think the right would not repealed, but completely repealed. They apply to each instance differently. What is prohibited may be permitted, and what is permitted may be prohibited, depending on the character of the recipients. It's God's, the thing with the repeal thing is God says, I believe in certain things, but I apply different values to different situations. I have my kids, I believe in discipline. I also believe in not being overly strict. I apply it as I see it. If I'm being disciplining my child today, doesn't mean I gave up on the truth of the value of not being overly strict. I'm working with it. So why can't God apply? And that's what he's saying. Why can't God edit things per the generations? So that's one perspective of the students of Maimonides. So another perspective from another one of the greats. His name is Rabbi Moshe Aftrani. He lived 100 years or so, 150 years after the Rabbi Albo. Says, considering the Torah's giver, namely God, the Torah is perfect. No change ever befalls God. So too, no change ever arises in the words of his mouth, for change cannot emerge from the changeless. The verse refers to this whenever it states, I am God, after issuing a mitzvah. A number of times in the Torah, God says, this is the mitzvah, I am God. We knew that. This is well after Sinai, just a couple of weeks in the Torah portion. We know you're God. It's Torah, it's coming from. What's he saying about I am God? After, as like an exclamation point on a mitzvah, alluding to the verse, you shall keep all my statutes and laws and you shall do them, I am God. Meaning you ought to hold in your heart those commandments with appointed times until the time arrives, and so to the rest, and do them, for I am God. Just as I am God, eternally free of change, so too my statutes and my laws shall never be changed or replaced. So we have a perspective, two different perspectives. One is that the Torah is a user manual. A user's manual has to adapt to the user. God gave me a guidebook to help me live my life. You know, my struggles at 18 are not the same as struggles at 56. It's different. So I look to the Torah, but you can imagine that if God sees that the world has changed, and therefore the user's manual has to be adapted, we could do that. Another perspective is that there's changeless. Because God is changeless, it's not about the user. It's a gift of God's. And God gave holiness, godliness to us through the Torah, and that's changeless. So there's these two different paths, it would seem. And let's take a look at even from the Talmud. Different insinuations. In the Mishnah, we're told, greatest Torah, for it gives life to its adherents in this world and in the world to come. As the verse states, for their life for those who find him, healing to all their flesh. So it seems that Torah helps me live my life, gives me life, enables my life, brightens my life. It's really for the user's manual. Yet we saw that Rabbi Moshe Trani takes a very different perspective, and that's what we want to talk about here today. Because these two opinions are not necessarily irreconcilable, but they're addressing different epochs in our history. There's the way Abraham and Sarah and everyone pre-Sinai related to Torah, and then there's what happened at Sinai and how the Torah we have. What kind of Torah do we have? Interestingly, in text 9a, the Talmud tells us a quote of Rabbi Yochanan. He says himself said, because it's contradistinction to something that came before him. The first were the 10 Commandments. It's Anochi. That's the first word in the Torah. And Anochi means I. God says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first words of the 10 Commandments. I am God, your God. Is an acronym. That word Anochi is actually an acronym for 4 different words. 4 letters, 4 words. I myself wrote and gave it. I gave out, and the way they translated, I wrote myself into this book. Anochi means that when you look at a Torah, when we study Torah, what we're doing right now is we're absorbing godliness. We'll get our minds around that a little bit. Let's look at 9b. And there on 9b, Rashi, the primary commentary in the Torah, says, I myself, I personally. So there's 2 ways of looking at the Torah.
But then when I started staying in this exercise situation, it becomes very easy for shedding to happen because it's been shown.
I don't know what that is. 1 second. Let me just check to make sure that everything is. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So there's 2 ways of approaching the Torah. They're both legitimate, but they're very different from each other. One is that God gave the Torah to humanity as a guidebook. That is true from this perspective. That is true of Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham and Sarah. God gave them these people. They're living in a world of polytheism. And God says, I don't want the world to be a jungle. I'm going to give you a guidebook. At Sinai, we got something else. Because the guidance, as guidance is, it's pretty much there already. What was the gift of Sinai? Let's think about it this way. I'll give a pedestrian example. I want to give someone I love a gift. Why? Because I want to show my love. Something, what do they need in their life? A recliner. Could be some stress, hang out. What do you mean a recliner? I'm buying a recliner for a person, for a loved one. Is it because here now make sure to sit back every day? Am I giving them instruction for life? Is it me about giving them that I looked at their life and now I realize that they're missing something? or did I start from something else? He said, I want to give them something. And I want to give them something as an expression of my love. Now I want it to be something that's usable. So I picked a recliner. If I felt that, let's say for my father, who could, if I felt, because he's almost 90 and he has his physical needs, if I felt that what's important for him now is a recliner, I would be getting him something very functional because I love him. But I'm giving him something very functional. I'm giving him something that's just gonna help him. It didn't start off with, I got up in the morning, I want to do something for him. No, I'm taking care of him. Of course I love him, but I'm getting him a recliner because I think he needs it for his physical welfare. It's different when I'm filled with love and say, I want to do something to express my love. And then I come to the recliner. Those are two different gifts. It's the same recliner, but one is an expression of my love. It's if they're sensitive to it, it's about me and you, and the recliner is just a symbol. Or it's about the recliner, and I happen to be the one who gave it because I care. Two very different, again, some pedestrian example. When God gave us the Torah, God gave us, it says, I gave you myself. The Torah, it says, the Anochi is, I gave you myself in this writing. It happens to be a user's manual, beautiful. But I am in it. That's the gift. That happened at Sinai. Abraham and Sarah never had that level of closeness with God. They had tremendous. But God loved them, they loved God, and God gave them directions. But they never had the gift of Torah. That's why they weren't Jewish. Torah, when we got to Torah, there was a shift in our relationship. It was a mass conversion. We are more Jewish than Abraham and Sarah were. Because they were with the program as much as you could be with the program. They were monotheists, but they didn't have that level of connection. And therefore, think about it just also functionally. I spoke before about mezuzah. Let's say the mezuzah on that door. Say I take it down. You can't see it because the door's closed. If they take it down and I check it, and it's, God forbid, the words have been obliterated. I don't know why. It was the heat. Maybe some kid poured water in it. I had no idea. It's obliterated. Got to change the mezuzah. What do I do with the old mezuzah? And the mezuzah that really can't even be read anymore, I bury it. I have a box in my office for two boxes for old things. Yeah.
Don't you just have to change the scroll?
Yeah.
Not the full.
Right. When I say the mezuzah, I mean the scroll.
Okay.
The other thing, there's the mezuzah case. What makes the mezuzah is the scroll, even if it's just wrapped in the cellophane. We don't need the case is to protect or whatever, or for niceness. The mezuzah is the scroll. So if I take it down, I'm going to put it in my box, and it'll eventually be buried. What would happen? I said before, what happens if Abraham and Sarah had a rock outside their tent, and they wrote on it, God is one. God's the oneness of the universe. Right? So when you walk into the tent, you have this God consciousness. They're Abraham and Sarah, they're monotheists, they want to bring it to the world. And now they break camp, they want to move the tent. What happens with the rock? Nothing. A camel can come sit on it. It's just a rock. It's a rock. It didn't become holy. Why? Because when we do a mitzvah with the parchment, we transform something animal hide, which is parchment, into a holy object, a Torah scroll. All of a sudden, we have this, we're able to impact the world where we would do mitzvahs with it. All of a sudden, we see we have changed the spiritual dynamics, the genetic, or the subatomic relationship and structure of the thing becomes a holy object. Abraham and Sarah didn't have that. The only thing that they were able to do is with the circumcision, where it impacted the body, and that's why there's this odd thing. Again, I don't want to hung up on this. You see Abraham and Sarah, and a couple of times it comes up in the Torah where Abraham wants someone to swear and says, "Put your hand under my thigh." What are you putting his hand on his thigh? It's kind of freaky for us in 2024. But he said, the only holy object I have is the bris, because I had a mitzvah. So that was the holy object. Come to be, because we were going to swear. You want to hold a holy object. Don't try this at home. But the idea is that holiness, when we do a mitzvah, it becomes holy. But they didn't have that capacity. They didn't have that level of gift from God. Sorry, let's go to number 10. Text 10. And this is from the founder of Chabad. He points out that Torah study in the Hebrew is referred to as calling. We call it kriya. If someone came in yesterday before we did Torah, and if they were, a Jew used to observance on Shabbat, they'd come and say, "Was there kriya yet? Was there this reading of the Torah?" But kriya actually means calling. Torah studies referred to as calling, kriya, as in to call or read aloud the Torah. This is significant, for through engaging in Torah study, he said, the Rabbi Zalman says it's a very precise word we use. We call when we study Torah, we call to God to come to us. We're beckoning God, as it were, just as one calls a friend to come close. And children come to their parents to come and be together with them and not be unattached with them and leave them alone, God forbid. When we study Torah, we're calling God, saying, "I want to be close to you. And I can find you in the Torah." This explains the verse, Rabbi Zalman says, God is close to all of those who call him, to all who call upon him in truth. For truth refers only to Torah. Meaning that one can call God through Torah specifically, in contrast to calling God by other means, such as crying, Father, Father. So when we're studying Torah on a Sunday morning, even though we come in to have conversation, get maybe some ideas, food for thought, at the core of it, what we're doing is we're not consciously perhaps, we're calling God, say, "I want you in my life. I want to connect with your Torah because you invested yourself in your Torah." So in that sense, God gave us a tremendous gift at Sinai. The Torah scroll in the Ark, the things we study, God says, "I am there." It's I gave you. And if I love someone and gave them a recliner or a kugel, I don't know if I'm in that kugel or recliner. My sentiments are there. But God, we're saying, actually put himself in out of love to us, gave us, put divinity, put God himself or itself in the Torah. So now we have a question. If it's that important, why don't we study Torah all day? And the Talmud analyzes that. The sages taught, for what need did the verse state, "And you shall gather your grain"? This is in our daily Shema. Twice a day or 3 times a day, we say we gather our grain. It's an agricultural society. It means you go to work. Why did it have to tell us that? Because it is stated, this Torah shall not depart from your mouths, which it says in the book of Joshua. I might have understood this literally, that I have to study it 24 hours a day. So the verse says, "You shall gather your grain," meaning behaving according to the way of the world. So said Rabbi Yishmael. So this great rabbi, the 1st and 2nd century, Rabbi Yishmael, he says that the reason that in our Shema, which tells us to study Torah, also says, "Go and gather your grain." Why is God? I'll figure out what to do. Why does God have to tell me? Is it a mitzvah to go gather my grain? Is it a mitzvah to go to work? Rabbi Shmuel says the Torah is trying to tell you about balance. You might look at the Torah and say, "Torah is such a gift. I'm created by God. I want to embrace God. I have to study Torah the whole day. Forget about how I'll pay the rent. I don't know, but I'm going to study." And Rabbi Yishmael says, actually, the reason that that line of gather your grain is put in there, it's meant to balance. One is in the Shema it says, and you shall speak the words of Torah, in other words, study Torah. So it's supposed to work. Have the way of the world. You have to live like human beings and bring Torah into your life. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was, we spoke about him last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. He is a great rabbi, a great spiritualist, author of the Zohar, of the Kabbalah. And he lived for 13 years in a cave. Because he was running away from the Romans, but he had absolute, in the language of the Torah study was his livelihood. And he was able to manage. Didn't have too much money, but he was able to manage. And because to him, life was all about Torah. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, can one plow at plowing season, sow at sowing season, harvest at harvest season, thresh at threshing season, when the windy season, you got no time to study Torah. What will become of the Torah? Instead, when Israel performs God's will, their work is performed by others. As it states, and strangers will stand there to feed your flock. Trust in God, study Torah, you'll have what you need. That's what his perspective is. When Israel does not perform God's will, on page 100. Let me go to this. So, okay. When Israel does not perform God's will, they perform their work themselves, as it states, and you shall gather your grain. Moreover, they will perform other people's work, as it states, you shall serve your enemy. So these were two perspectives. Generations later, great Talmudic Rabbi Abaye said, many guided their lives according to Rabbi Shmuel, and they worked and they conducted themselves in what we call the way of the world, normal humanity, and brought Torah into their lives too, and they succeeded in their study. They were able to. They made time to study. A Sunday morning, a Wednesday evening, whatever it is, maybe a little on Chabad.org, a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening. So Rabbi Shmuel says that way worked historically. You can look at what the jury of history tells us. It says many acted according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and did not succeed. Some people tried just to live and just Torah, and some of them succeed. Didn't work. Yeah.
Is this set of things that we're reading right now the source of the problem between, for instance, the state of New York and the Hebrew schools in terms of what they teach?
I would not know, because nobody. In today's. Look what the Talmud says. The Talmud says that this idea of putting yourself into Torah study 24/7 and only doing that, it's not going to work. Talmud says this. Itself says. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, maybe you can have some rare individual. It's not going to work. So what you're saying is you're asking about the yeshivas in New York.
Yeah.
Those people sending their kids to yeshivas are very, very well aware that their kids are going to have to make livings. And many of those people, the parents, have homes, pay insurance, are able to do the things, and they went through the same system they're putting the kids through. So it's not about whether or not we think the kids have to be equipped to earn a living. It's whether or not they agree that all of that secular studies is necessary to earn a living, because they did it without it. So it's hard to understand. It's a different culture. But what I would say is, listen, I studied secular studies in school, but I had peers who didn't, and surely they were behind me in ability. They could speak English; they're American, but they didn't have, algebra isn't the thing, and even some basic grammar and spelling is not great. But you really can't look at it, just in my life. You can't look at the peers and say those people didn't succeed. Some of them did very well for themselves. Just need a good secretary. And what's interesting is I deal with a pretty intelligent crowd, and by and large probably pretty well educated. I'm not, someone can have a degree from a good university and still not spell that well. Still not conjugate a verb that well. I've seen enough of it. And so I'm not, I don't want to get embroiled in that. I'm not, I understand that well-meaning people can say, we want to protect these kids and give them the secular knowledge they need. What I'd say is that from my end, although I understand it and I'm not getting engaged in it, and my kids were given the tools in secular studies, and I did myself, and my father gave it to me, but my parents, if we're talking about having functional human beings for a functional society, they do very, very well. They are an asset to society. They do very well for themselves, and they're functional human beings. And they probably need some therapy at the same rate as anybody else needs some therapy. But I mean, with things, but I don't see it's not the incredible crisis that they make it out to be. Say that if not knowing Shakespeare means you're not a human, okay, then there's what are you gonna do, right? Okay. That's about mitzvah. Okay. We'll go to text 12. This is from the Rebbe's father. He writes in a letter, with joy and sincerity. He's writing to someone who works for a living. Most people don't have the luxury to sit and study all day. With joy and sincerity, be diligent to keep fixed times for Torah study every day, in the Torah's revealed aspects as well as in Hasidic philosophy. He was very into, he said, make it a fixed time, make it an appointment. When you make an appointment, it impacts your soul. In addition, undertake to love your fellow Jew and invite those who know you to join classes and study, each according to their aptitude and talents. And he's writing this to a person who's in business, who probably has a lot of stresses in business. Try to find time. You can do it. Find some time for a Torah study also. It's 20 minutes, whatever it is, just do it. Furthermore, business people possess the great asset that only they can ennoble the streets and business places with the pleasant light of godliness, something impossible for one who studies full time. In the Hasidic perspective, say someone who's out there in the streets, maybe I'm out there a little bit, but I'm living in the Chabad world, and I'm me. So when I say something to someone, spirituality-wise or morality-wise, it's framed as like what I expect them to say. There's something that can be lost in the message because of who I am. But when a business partner, and I've heard this from people, I just don't want to go too far, but I have a friend from school. We're classmates, and he's done very, very well for himself. And he's in real estate. And I was meeting with an Italian real estate guy out here. I didn't even know he knew him. And then he said to me, he said, he throws the name at me. Dovi Sperlin, whatever. So I said, I went to school with him. How do you know him? He says, we're working together on some projects. I said, oh, I was at his bar mitzvah. He was at my bar mitzvah. Know him very well. And he says, he taught me something this is a Catholic guy. He taught me something very profound. I said, what was that? We were in the middle of a deal. It was an important deal. And he looked at his watch. I saw he kept looking at his watch, and he said, I'm going to have to step out for 15 minutes. I said, no. He said, it's the afternoon service. I got to go. He said, I love that. He said, there's money on the line. We got to get this done. We have a deadline. He wanted to do the afternoon service. That's because he's out there. There's no way I would have brought that type of a message and a value to this guy, but he's on the front lines. A business person's mission consists of two main parts: the work within oneself and the work of helping others, both of which refresh the soul. The work within oneself asks of a business person that a free moment during the workday, when one sits quietly in the store, but be it the chance to learn a Mishnah or two, a chapter of Tanya, which is a book of Hasidic thought, and there be some words of Torah, either from the scripture, Psalms, Tanya, that one knows by heart for the purpose of reviewing them, walking the street, in the market, in the store, and so on. And he used to say, just you're out there, think good things, substantive ideas in your minds. And here it brings us to something in our Torah portion. Again, this wasn't about this week's Torah portion, but one of the things it says, the Torah says, the title of the Torah portion is Naso, so the first word, which means to count. Count also the sons of Gershon by the house of the fathers, by the families, the Levites. But what does Naso mean conventionally? It doesn't usually mean count. It means lift up. Simple people, meaning people like us, would certainly want to grow and reach a level of being uplifted. The previous Rebbe's teaching pertains to how one reaches this level. One is of simple or high stature is well known. One must know that it is arrived at through Torah study. Torah is a gift of God's. And when we study Torah, we're uplifted because it's godliness in those words. And here in text 15, this is the final text. This is from the Rebbe. The giving of the Torah began with Anochi, serving as an acronym for I myself wrote and gave it. This means that God embedded himself in the Torah so that the Torah we learn here in this world is the very Torah rooted in God's essence, enabling the unity of Israel, the Torah, and God are entirely one. As such, the sense in which Israel, the Torah, and God are entirely one is true of every Jew, even the simplest. And not only those simple in the intellectual sense, but all of those of spiritually simple circumstances. In the moment we study Torah, we're one with God himself. So I'm just going to cut this here. If there are any questions, then I got a bas mitzvah waiting for me. So I wish you all a great week.